I was very influenced by visual approach to ecological perception. Gibson, yeah. Not in all regards, but I found much of Gibson's work extremely useful. That his sense is that when we're looking at the world, we're seeing something like, I broadened it a bit, but pathways to a desired destination, tools that can facilitate our movement forward, obstacles that might come up in our path, and a vast domain of irrelevance around that. And that's true for every perceptual act. It seems to be particularly evident in the case of vision. A vision is something like a navigation aid. That's one way of thinking about it. So I'm curious what you think about that. And well, if any of those ideas, how those ideas might be related or not related to the manner in which you're conceptualizing object perception, let's say.
Well, I mean, ecological, capital E, ecological perception, ecological vision with Gibson, ended up biting onto a whole lot of philosophical baggage that I never bought into. I consider myself a lowercase e ecological vision person, in which case you can't understand what vision or any mechanisms are doing unless you understand what it was functioning for in the natural environment for all of those millions of years. And so let me just give you some specific examples. So one of the things that I had noticed was that people had talked about color for 100 years and color vision. First of all, to back up, we and some other primates have a third dimension. Your dog just has grayscale and yellow-blue. 2 dimensions. All the bunny rabbits, horses just have 2 dimensions. But some of us primates have a third dimension, red, green. And so for 100 years, they thought, well, maybe it has something to do with finding fruits in the forest.
Right.
And there was never any good evidence for this at all. There's incredible varieties and variability in terms of the kinds of diets that they would have, not to mention just even generation to generation is going to experience radically different kinds of diets of fruits. But they all have the same, the exact same kind of color vision. And it's a weird kind of
This is across primate groups?
Across
trichromate primate groups?
All the old world trichromates have, so dogs and bunny rabbits have one low wavelength sensitive cone down in the 550s. And then the other one, in the 400s, 450s or so, and that's sort of the blue cone. And then the other ones, we have one in the 550s or so for the dogs that's around here. So you've got 2. And then what you'd expect if you're going to have a third one would be that suddenly it may be over here. You'd have the uniformly distributed like RGB. For your cameras, they're uniformly distributed across the spectrum, which is sort of a poor man's spectrometer. You've got 3 across the spectrum. You put them uniformly. But in fact, ours is this. We ended up with another cone sensitivity right next to the other one. They're exactly side by side in a really weird, peculiar way. Why would you want to have a third cone sensitivity, the same part of the spectrum? It's just like 15 nanometers away.
Right, because in principle, it wouldn't be detecting anything radically different.
No.
That's the problem. Okay,
right.
So that's the problem you're trying to address.
All right, so it's true. I realized later that when you look, I'd noticed that one of the things that matters is blood under the skin, blushes, blanches, health modulations, all of these kinds of emotions, signals that humans and other primates are doing on bare skin is shown by virtue of the blood under the skin. And it's by virtue in particular of the oxygenation, deoxygenation of hemoglobin under the skin. And it turns out that when you're looking at the completely arbitrary and weird spectrum of hemoglobin, which is it has a little W in this one part. So it goes like this, and there's a little W. And that's when it's oxygenated. And when it deoxygenates, that W in that little region turns into a U. And so these little peaks right there in the W part, if you wanted to be sensitive to this oxygenation, deoxygenation, you actually have to have 2 cones right there so that the little W peak in the middle as it goes down in terms of U, and the other parts that go up, you have to sense it. You have to have a peculiar spots of 2 cones in this exact spot. So I was like, oh my God, exactly where you'd have to put cones to be sensitive to the only spot where you could tell that it's getting oxygenated versus deoxygenated is exactly in the spots where we have our cones.
Okay, so let me sum up that just so that I make sure I'm following you. So the objection you have to standard theories of trichromate perception is that the 2 of the color spectra that we see are so close together on the electromagnetic spectrum that there's no advantage to distinguishing them that's clear in the natural world as such. And you're associating that with the enhanced ability to detect difference in oxygenation in the skin. And you're going to associate that, I presume, with emotional display. Is that right?
So this is an empath sense. So this is, in short, our color vision, our primate color vision, is an empath sense. It's only by virtue of that we can see these blushes and blanches, and it's only by virtue of that you can actually see veins at all. The veins, of course, are the deoxygenated parts, and the more fleshy red parts are the more oxygenated parts. This stuff is completely invisible if you're colorblind. If you're a colorblind doctor, even going back to Dalton, he had complained about his complete inability to see if someone had infected in one eye versus the other. No idea. If they've got blood or stool on their pants, they can't tell the difference between whether it's blood or stool. These things go back for a long ways. As soon as you're color deficient, you're missing one of those. Now it's just you can't distinguish these states at all.
Do we know if people who are colorblind are deficient in facial emotional processing?
That has been very hard to test but what we do know is that there's a long history of medical doctors who have known problems in just detecting blood state related diagnosis, symptoms that are recognizable by blood state.
To that.
But actually doing controlled experiments where you're able to do this it has been very hard. So no one has quite that data. There's a lot of
what would happen
my dad's colorblind and he's emotionally dense.
What would happen if you did rapid presentation of angry faces, like almost at a subliminal level? Do you think that people who were colorblind would be less able to detect the difference between angry and non-angry faces, if at least to the degree that that's signaled by facial flushing?
Well, yeah, I mean, you can certainly mimic on screen. You could try to mimic the spectral difference in some sense, so that. First of all, just to back up, one of the interesting side effects of this is that your camera doesn't show you color vision. Your TV doesn't show you color vision. All of the cameras that we use are still, in some sense, to color vision because their third receptivity is way out. It's distributed way out there. So none of those cameras that we take these pictures of are able to sense these oxygenation modulations.
Okay, so that's an experimental problem.
Yeah, so this makes it deeply difficult. It also means that literally we're not seeing all of the states that we experience in real life. The glow of youth, when you see glow of youth, you're talking about the glowing of oxygenated blood on the skin. None of that's available.
Okay, so you mentioned the glow of youth. I mean, hypothetically, one of the markers that could drive transformation of color vision in the direction of emotion detection that was blood related would be for picking up signs of fecundity. And that would be a direct association. And there is evidence that I think is quite compelling that one of the things that makes women attractive to men are signals of health that are associated with enhanced fertility. All of those signals seem to be associated with what people conceive of as feminine beauty. And you picked one that was cardinal there, which is that flush. You call it the flush of youth.
Right, and it's not just on or off. I mean, different motions will lead to different kinds of gradients on the face. And of course, it's not just the face, the whole body can flush. And the other primates, the rump becomes so exaggerated that the UK would take some of the females when they were having estrus out because it was almost embarrassing for the kids to come and watch. So it's it's multidimensional. It's color related, but it's not just red, green. But there's actually where you have more. Like if I squeeze my hand and let go, you get yellow, blue differences. Now it's not because when it's squeezed out, it's more yellow. When there's more blood, it's all things equal more blue. But if it's oxygenated blood, then it's blue and red, so it's more purple. If it's deoxygenated blood, it's green and blue, and so bluish green. So in fact, you end up by virtue of concentration variations, blue, yellow, and oxygenation modulations, red, green, you can get any possible hue at all. Which is why if you're a painter and you're trying to actually paint human faces, when we go back and look at their paintings, which I could never do, you're like, oh my God, they're using all the hues.
Yeah, right.
Because we don't typically consciously notice it. We just look at the skin and we think of it as sort of this matte, like a doll. But in fact,
pink.
Yeah, some pink, but of course it's not. And you're really seeing the blood. You are not looking. Skin is not. If you've ever, if you get a bruise, the first thing you notice is that it's, of course, total discoloration. And so you're really seeing a dynamic view into the very state and function and health of the individual. It's completely a highly transparent surface, and we're not consciously aware of it, although we're certainly reading it all the time.
And so how has that? So that's a theory of color vision as health detection. Is it a theory that...
But mostly, I don't know whether it's mostly health or mostly emotion. It's certainly emotion, state,
Right,
and health,
it wouldn't
all
only
the-
have to be
right,
one
yes,
of those
yes.
things anyways.